Helo, shwmai, croeso. Welcome to another one in our series of Sgwrs podcasts, where we look into the matters that we've been thinking about and things that have been referred to us as well. And today is quite a biggie. We're going to be talking about demystifying the inspection process. We get this quite a bit. You know, there's a lot of people who haven't been inspected for a long time. What is it like? What's the new framework like? What are Estyn like to deal with? So we're lucky to be joined by two fantastic guests today. First question, before I ask you to introduce yourselves, really is, we're not related, are we? No money.
No, definitely not, unfortunately.
Could do with it.
But you're both heads who've had inspections within the past year, which is why we've invited you. So we thought we'd just go through what was it like to be inspected. So perhaps if you introduce ourselves.
Yeah, Colin Ellis, head teacher at Castell in Flintshire in North Wales.
And I'm Michelle Joyner, head of the pupil referral unit in Bridgend, which is called the Bridge Alternative Provision Portfolio PRU. It's quite a mouthful.
Well remembered.
Thank you.
So first of all, thanks for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. I'm really always keen that rather than us tell everyone how we feel things, that we get people from the profession actually reflecting on your, and this is good or bad. So perhaps if we start with, the big question, how was it for you? Perhaps if you can take us through from, everyone I know in the profession looks forward to that call. How was it for you when you first got the call? How we took you through, and then the inspection itself? Michelle, perhaps?
I can remember it quite vividly because we had the call on the first day back after the Christmas holiday.
Oh.
So we had organised a CPD session for staff based on the RSE curriculum, and we were in the art room, all the staff, door closed, and my admin team know once we're on a training day, don't disturb us. And I could see out of the corner of my eye come into the door my senior admin officer. And she was doing this to me. And I thought, it's a Monday. Oh, no. I came outside the door and she was like, quick, Estyn are on the phone. And I said, oh, okay. So I went over to the office and obviously that was the notification call. But what I wasn't expecting, so I spoke to the coordinator who, explained this is the official notification. But then she said, I'll phone you back. I think it was in 2 hours to go through the process. So for me, I was expecting it all just to happen in the first phone call. But then, the second phone call came and I think that was the worst time. It was the not knowing. So you have your first phone call, then I had to go back into the room. I didn't want to tell the staff at that point. And I was sitting there thinking, I can't concentrate now. I need the next bit to happen. But then, the process was explained. We had the date, which was obviously 2 weeks on the Monday. And, I think it was quite straightforward, the explanation. There was what documents we had to put in the VIR. You were told who your team would be. And the lead inspector then said, I was told the lead inspector would make a phone call to us the following day. So from that perspective, there were no issues.
Similar?
Yeah, I think, you're always waiting for the call. The last time we were inspected was 2017, so we knew we were due. And I think it's the waiting of it is the waiting for the phone call. But actually, when it arrives, from my perspective, is right. Come on, let's get on with it. But I felt the coordinator was very good. Very reassuring about the process, what's going to follow, and talked about the VIR. And the VIR, people have this big thing about what do you put in it, how much you put in it, and stuff like that. But from my perspective, it was quite straightforward. There wasn't an overemphasis on documentation that you needed to plan, and we were reassured about that right from the off. And I think that's quite important. And so from my perspective of going through a process of inspection 10 years ago in a previous school, that sort of getting ready for it it's not as big as it is now. Now the process is a little bit more simpler, I would say. We don't need that much documentation. We had things ready because we knew what was coming. You got to be ready. But I think if you know your school, you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, when you do get the call, it just sharpens you up and says, right, okay, let's bring it together. And in terms of staff, I always kept it as a low priority for the year. At the end of the day, the school's always going to be there. We've got to make sure we add value to the students every day. And if you just focus on the teaching and learning, that's what they're coming to see. So I felt it was a chance to show what the school's about. So a bit of apprehension, but it needs to happen.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a bit of apprehension.
Yes, yeah. I think I waited until lunchtime before I told the staff, but I did very much keep it low-key and just said, we'll carry on with our training day. We're not going to change what we've already got planned.
Keep doing what you always do.
Yeah, just do what you always do.
Can I ask you, you were both nominees.
Yes.
Just your reflections on being nominee. It's interesting you were saying about that. I had a phone call once off a head who was about to go skiing with the school. And I'd had the magic phone call. And my advice was go.
Yes, yeah.
Just go.
Yeah.
What's going to change in 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think our caretaker said, I'll stay open late every night for you if you need. That we'll be open on the weekend. And I said, well, we wouldn't normally come in on a weekend. We don't normally stay late. No. So I'm not going to ask staff and I'm not going to put that pressure on staff. Yeah. And, I did try to encourage staff, just do whatever you've got planned, just carry on and do.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to Scotland the weekend of the call. So I went to Scotland. It was planned and that's what it is. And with regards to opening school and stuff like that, we said if staff want it, but there'll be no reason to be there, and I'm not going to be there, so I'm not expecting you to be there. So I think I went in on the second weekend on the Sunday just to make sure everything was in place, but I don't expect to do anything different really.
No, we didn't.
Some staff did take it up because they wanted to, but because they felt better for it, but I wouldn't encourage to to be dragging staff.
No, we stayed on the Friday night just with all the books and the work samples just to put them in order, because I didn't want to have to go through that on the Monday morning. But we were out of school by 6, and that was just the senior leaders. Our staff had left way before then.
Yeah, that's great.
In terms of the nominee, I've been a nominee as a deputy 10 years ago. As I said, the inspection I felt was a lot different. So I remember being nominee and there would be documents, ring-bound folders, must have been 40 odd on the table 10 years ago. Well, there was none of that. Basically, all we had in the room in the room with the inspectors was the student books. That's all we had.
Same as us.
A lot of the stuff we just loaded up online, or we had links online. But I think that I really do feel a head teacher needs to be the nominee. Yeah, I don't know about yourself.
I definitely agree with that.
10 years ago, I think it was a little bit different. Lots of head teachers weren't being nominee. But for me, the whole process was a chance, 4 days of sitting in a room with people, professional people, talking about your school. I think you need a notebook when you're in there.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you pick up stuff, and it's not about transcribing everything that they say, because they say a lot and they give you loads of feedback. You have a big meeting on the Monday where they feed back to you, and on the Tuesday they feed back, on the Wednesday. And you could be writing all the time. But for me, I was reflecting. The whole process for me, if I was going to sum it up, it was the best self-evaluation I've ever had. Because you're 4 days listening to people going, right, that's what you do well. And it's reassuring, because that's what I thought. That's what I hope you'd say. So it was that, but also, right, how are we going to make this school a little bit better? What things am I bringing out from these people? And I had a very clear understanding when I left of how I was going to progress the school forward. So just examples, linking, homework came out about making sure it's meaningful homework type sort of stuff, and linking it to one of our teaching and learning about effective feedback. And I came out and said, why don't we just link that together? Effective feedback from teachers and homework, and that's now one of our priorities for next year. I basically, I know we do stakeholder questionnaires and so forth about self-evaluation, but in terms of self-evaluation, I started to write my development plan. And it was April time when we, end of March, April. So it was a good time to do it for us. Really good time. I know for some schools, they prefer to get it out of the way. But actually, it really did kick us in now to finishing off this year, self-evaluation, where we're at. So for me, that was the most thing I'd take out of the process. Really good self-evaluation.
Brilliant. And I still go to an inspection every couple of weeks, and I think it's so much better to have the head as a nominee. I've seen it work so much better when the heads. Can I bring us back to Michelle, something you mentioned, but I'd like you both your reflections, because you both intimated this. You were a nominee, but the first thing you did was calm.
Yes.
Don't get excited about this.
Yes.
Because, you guys' heads cast a big shadow in your schools. If you're going to get excited and defensive and stuff, I see inspections don't go that well sometimes. But where you go in, it's calm, it's open, they tend to go a lot better.
Yes, I would say, we tried to keep everything as normal as possible. And as head and nominee, it's up to you to set the tone. And I think that's the same with the team you have. If you are open, transparent from the beginning, and you are accepting the feedback that is being offered to you, that's what made it a successful inspection for us. Staff, comments from staff were, we felt at ease with the inspectors. They blended into the classroom. We had plenty of opportunity to speak with inspectors, even outside of the scheduled meetings. So, where previously maybe schools were taught to, oh no, it's Eston, let's fear them. I would say from my experience, that definitely isn't the case now.
I totally agree. The word fear is an interesting word, really, because 10 years ago, I think there was that fear factor, that there was that real apprehension. You are going to be apprehensive.
Yes.
There's no doubt, because, it's unusual for a team to come in, and whenever you're evaluated, whatever you do, whatever profession, somebody coming in and judging, not judging and putting it, but, they're having a look at what you do and how you do things, you're always going to be apprehensive on that. But I think the fear, that has really died down.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I felt it gone away. And I remember you did a conference in Llandudno when you first came.
I did.
First came into post, and I think it was all the secondary head teachers in North Wales were there. And one of the things, you stood up on the stage and you said, it's going to be different, and I'm going to try and get rid of this fear factor. And from my perspective, it was open dialogue. You could have a chat with all the inspecting team. They were very forthcoming. And that's good. And I think that's a real step forward.
Yeah, and I would say that the team we had definitely took into account the context of our pupil referral unit. And,
was very different.
That's so important to know, that people understand the context you're working in.
Yeah. Okay, Brill, thanks. Right, imagine you haven't been inspected, you've never come across Eston. One of the things I see is every single day is different. The Monday is different to the Tuesday, is different to the Wednesday, and if you've got a Thursday, the Thursday is very different as well. Perhaps if I start with James, take us through that week when we arrived, there's boots on the floor. How did it start? How did it progress? And what were the emotions perhaps that you went through?
Yeah, I think they come in on the Monday and you have the big meeting and you put your school into context. They give you that opportunity to talk about the school. And I think any head teacher would be ready for that, probably weeks in advance. Where are your strengths and weaknesses? And I think that's important, that you're given that opportunity to talk about your school and be honest about it. And I think being honest is really important. Don't try and hide anything, because it's, I think it has changed, but it's still as thorough.
Yes.
I think the whole, from my perspective, it's very thorough.
Yes.
The whole process, very fair, very transparent, but it's deep, it's meaningful, and you need it to be, because that's what the value of Eston is. So that sort of Monday afternoon, the outline of where it's going, and they were walking around the school then in the afternoon as well.
That was the same for us.
Yeah, Tuesday's a big day.
Yeah.
Tuesday's a really big day, where actually the room we were all in was virtually empty most of the day because they're out there. Yeah. And then they just come in, popping back. I think the feedback at the end of every day is really useful, and that's quite a long, that can be that process. We're quite a big school, so that would go on till probably 2 hours or so, where they were feeding back, and that's really useful. That's where you get in where we're going here. And there is that bit of apprehension, because they talk about, we found this could be something that we're looking at, and you start thinking, right, okay. But there was reassuring as well. They're saying, well, from our perspective, that's probably pretty good first day type sort of stuff. So, you left there feeling, I'm not too sure about that. But I would say Tuesday's the big day of it all. And then Wednesday it seems to come together. And you can see the process, actually, of how they start to join it together. Because I'm not a peer inspector, I haven't had that training. But you could start to see how they were piecing things and how it was starting to fold together on the Wednesday, and it was a bit more on the Thursday. But yeah, it was interesting how they start to bolt it all together.
Yeah.
I was going to say for us, because our inspection ended on the Wednesday, Tuesday was our very big and long day. So we had the additional lay inspector join the team. And I would say by the end of the Tuesday, it was sort of emotionally exhausting. You're trying to process everything that you're being asked for or being told, and you're still thinking, right, so when I leave this meeting now, I need to ensure that, I've got this that has been requested, I've got that, I need to speak to this member of staff because possibly this needs to be seen tomorrow. And then on the Wednesday, I felt a little bit like, I'm just waiting now. I'm waiting because, the team went back out onto the floor. And for me, it was after lunch on Wednesday that we had the feedback meeting. And what I found really useful was being part of the writing of the final sort of feedback report. Yeah. And I would say, don't be afraid to challenge if there is something you disagree with, because we had a recommendation regarding writing across the whole school. And I was sitting there thinking, I don't know if I agree with that, because we get good GCSE grades. So if it was across the whole school, we wouldn't be getting those grades at GCSE. And I thought, do I share this? And yes, I shared this. And then, we looked at it as a team. And then that recommendation was reflected then. So it only included the younger pupils. So, that's something, being part of the team, your voice is valued and acknowledged.
I agree with that. There were a few things that, I just said, can we just have a bit of a chat on that one? And they would often give a good reason of why. Yes. And then you can't argue with that. From the evidence that they've seen, but there was that chance to discuss it. And some things did, there was a bit manual and, okay, Colin, we'll have a look at that. Or do you want to provide some evidence that would support that? And I think that was a real good thing. If there was a little bit of, not too sure about that one, Colin, could you just get some evidence, or get some students, or or actually in our next meeting I'll mention it to the students, the student voice. I think that's another thing. There's loads of student voice compared to the previous ones.
Yes,
they do listen to the students a lot, and it's not just the groups of your student council and that type of thing. It's the walking down the corridor chat. There was a lot of that going on. And again, that is good, isn't it? Because that's giving you a true flavour of what's your school. You're not, people aren't being prepped. They just, I'll have a chat with that student. And so anything I think I did raise, and I didn't raise much, but if I did, you felt that they would actually support and go out, the inspectors.
Yes,
and I'll ask some students about that. And then they would give you feedback afterwards and say, actually, Colin, no, they reaffirmed what we think, or actually, no, well, maybe you're right on that, because students say that's what you do. So, and that's important, isn't it?
I was going to say, regarding the pupils, because we've got some pupils who find change very difficult. And so providing the inspectors with kind of profiles of pupils to avoid, the inspectors took that on board. Right. And, if they felt they'd gone into a classroom and a pupil was becoming sort of dysregulated because of having someone new in the classroom, the inspectors were very good, and they, as the staff said, they tried to blend in, or they removed themselves and then went back to the classroom. So, it was a positive experience.
Well, that's good. I mean, one of the things, we've changed a lot, but the rigour hasn't. We haven't, not one iota of the standards we hold changed. It's really, one of the big things that we're really keen about is getting your voice into the inspection report, but also into the inspection activity. Did you go on learning walks with the team?
No, I didn't.
No, I didn't.
That's one of the things we've introduced now, is that actually we'll take the nominee on learning walks, so you can see directly with us what we're seeing, and we explain what we see, and you've got a chance to challenge or agree or whatever.
That's happening in the interim ones, isn't it?
It's coming through into the course.
Oh, is it? Right, okay.
Because we're continuing to, sort of tweak what we do.
Yeah.
Looking back, if we just stick with the inspection itself for a second, can I just, because one of the big things is that, we've tried to de-stress the prelim, with the Ready Already campaign. We've tried to really cut out a lot of the information we just didn't need, but schools were over-preparing because they felt, right, we've got to put our best foot forward. Yeah. During the week itself, what we're trying and always to get is an honest, authentic look at what's going on and just let people be their best selves. So how did you deal with your staff during the inspection week?
We just carried on as we would normally. So we always have a morning briefing before we open the doors to pupils. So during that, if there was anything that had been requested from the inspection team, I shared with staff and said, please can people gather me examples of this or that. We just carried on, giving the pupil updates we would in the morning, asked if, there was anything anybody was concerned about. But I think because the inspection team were approachable, if staff had anything that they wanted to raise with them, they didn't feel afraid to during break or lunchtime say to an inspector, "Oh, is it okay? Can I have a little chat with you about this? I'd like to explain this to you." So from our perspective, we just carried on as we normally would.
That's great.
We didn't do anything different. I didn't meet with, we always meet the leadership team every morning anyway, so we kept doing that. But we didn't bring staff together at all to give them what's going on. We just wanted to be normal. Actually, we had our school show. It was Our Day Out by Willie Russell for 3 nights that week. And we said, no, we'll keep doing that. And fair play to the Performing Arts department. Not only were they being inspected, but they were putting a show on every night and stuff like that. But for 3 nights, but yeah, just normal. Just keep it as normal as you can. So there's no special staff meetings or anything like that. And I didn't really feedback how it was going either. It just, I didn't want to create any sort of apprehension or, just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's going okay. And, that was it. That was the message I was giving the leadership team as well. But yeah, I think with your leadership team, having a clear line of communication with them during the day, I think is quite important, because they were asking for some more evidence, or could you have a look at this evidence, or could you get me something like that? But they wouldn't expect it there and then. They would say, if you get that sometime to us over the next 2 days or so, that'd be useful. So, you do need that team around, because really you don't want to be running around doing that sort of stuff. But what we did, we just had a few case studies in preparation for the whole thing beforehand, in each inspection area, but only 2 or 3 things that we felt that could be valuable, and we just had them ready. But other than that, and our school improvement plan, our self-evaluation, that's the only documentations really we had ready. I think that they met a lot with staff as well. So the staff groups and the variety of staff groups, there was a lot of staff being seen, and support staff as well. And I think that was a little bit different as well than 10 years ago. And the staff like that because they really feel involved in it.
Well, I thought it was, I see this increasingly now that, it's difficult for us, particularly for a big secondary, it's difficult for us to see everyone. But some of the staff now feel quite aggrieved if we don't go and see them.
Correct.
Which is a lovely position to be in. Yeah. But we find more and more inspectors now having to go out to the end of the day or something, just have a quick look at, make sure we pay attention to everyone, which is great,
Yeah, I think my staff, because we are a small provision, they all were seen more than once, some several times. But even though obviously staff are on alert, Estin are in the school, they I don't think it traumatized them, shall we say. They found the whole exercise, I'm hoping as painless as possible, because the feedback they gave it wasn't as bad.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
That should be our t-shirt. It's not as bad.
It's not as bad. It could be that. But I think we counted up, or actually Gwawr, our lead inspector, I think there was something like 67 teachers out of the 79 that were actually seen in a lesson or had an interview. So it's a high percentage.
Yeah.
And you're right, the ones that didn't or weren't seen, they were like, I would have loved them to come and have a chat with me or come to have a look at that lesson, which is nice to hear as well.
Yeah, it is. Looking back, I'll take us on, perhaps not this question, but the next question on reflections post-inspection. Was it a value? What's happened since? But is looking back at that week and the prep, anything you do differently?
I know what I've definitely learned. As an SLT, we are not very good at digitally organising our folders. So we now file everything under the inspection areas, because we used to file them any way, shape. We may have had duplicates of one. And I can remember on the Monday night, sort of on WhatsApp with SLT, where can I find? So, that's
there somewhere.
Yes, it's there. But because we never really kept a tight ship with our sort of digital filing system, that's something that we have done since. So now, as soon as we've got something, we're like, right, that's going into inspection area 1. This goes into inspection area 2. So it just streamlines the process. It just makes it easier.
That's a good tip.
It is a good tip.
That is a good tip,
I'm quite fortunate that the SLT are a bit younger than me, and they're pretty good at all the digitalisation of documents. So they were on hand, actually. But I think that makes it easier, isn't it? When it is on a computer, and you can just access it and click on a button.
Yeah, I think stress.
Yes, you're not having to use printers and all that. Those days are gone. I would have thought in many schools now, and it does make it easier that side. But you do need to make sure that they're in the right place.
They're in the right place.
They didn't give me that job.
Anything you do differently?
I don't think I would. I think it went pretty well for us. And I just think just keeping the calm, reflection and being calm, and actually it's not as bad as what you think it's going to be.
Yeah.
Because actually once it's all over, there is that. But then it's also, why did I worry too much about it, actually? You didn't need to worry or be too apprehensive about it. So I don't think I would do too much different. Just reassuring staff that it's going to be okay. I'm a bit like that anyway, that we do a good job. And if they say we're not, well, that's okay, because we're still, my overall view is the school's always going to be there. And once it's over, we'll just work at it. And if things do need to improve, then of course there's always something to improve. And Eston will find that for you, and they have with us, and that's great for us.
Cool.
So.
Reflections, you're a good few months past the inspection now. What, one of the big things I'm keen about is that what we do leads to value for you, but it makes impact. So thinking back, what have you learned? Was there anything takeouts from the actual inspection itself, and what have you done with it since?
I think our recommendations were areas that were already in our school development plan, but what it has allowed us to do is look at our staffing structure, because being a pupil referral unit, we don't necessarily have teachers who lead on subjects. So I'm hoping that on the back of the inspection report, this is something we can now put in place. So, we can have leaders of literacy, leaders of numeracy, leader of DCF, because otherwise it's all down to our SLT. So it is about now that distributed leadership. So that's something that I found useful, because it was a recommendation from Eston. It's something I can take to my management committee and the local authority and say, is there any way we can relook at the structure of how we are? Because to move forward, we need to be able to put something in place.
In terms of something similar to you, we had 2 recommendations that were already on our priority for that year. But actually what we've done with that, we had the big 6, if you like, of what we were looking at, the big priorities for the year. We've virtually kept our same priorities for next year. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're going to try and embed stuff that we've been doing, and some of the stuff we want to get a little bit better at. So that it really has kicked us on. I feel I haven't sat on my laurels at all with it, because I came out with a clear direction of where we needed to go. So things like the performance management. So this summer, we've ripped up the performance management schedule, how we do things, making sure that our performance management targets link in, individual staff link in with our priorities a lot better. And I picked that up from Estin in terms of, let's have a look at performance management. They must have had a look, and I was picking up, they were a bit wishy-washy, some of the targets and some of the impact of that performance management. And we really, really looked at that this year. And to be honest, we're in a lot better position this time of year than we've ever been, because usually we do the performance management, and the target setting after you get the results, the A-level and GCSE results. And actually, yes, they are important, but the nitty-gritty of teaching and learning is the most important.
Yeah.
And I think that was the real clarity that I got. Yes, teaching and learning, and you can talk about your results and your A-level and your GCSE, but that shouldn't be the big driving force of your school. And therefore, why can't we set our targets now for next year? So when they come on that first day in September, we all know where we're going. Performance management target with staff has been redone, and everybody's kickstarting in September, not waiting for those results and then going, we'll write our targets based on them. So it's been a big change for us. And I think it's put us in a lot better position.
Brilliant. So if I was trying to think of 4 words that people get when we arrive, just going to see if you recognise this at all. So this is not rehearsed. The first one is teaching and learning. Was it clear the emphasis is less on the rest, more on teaching and learning? And the second is cause and effect. The big thing we're trying to do through evaluation is, look, let's understand where we need to improve, but then let's monitor, is this actually leading to improvement? Was that clear?
Yes, I would say every conversation that we had as the team and being the nominee, it was all about, the difference that teaching and learning makes to the individual. And like you said, it wasn't always about grades. What's the value added for the individual? So for some of ours, it was the well-being and the emotional and social. So, but it was always about, the what difference you do in this. So what difference has it made?
My philosophy is teaching and learning is all that matters in a school. That 5 hours a day in a classroom is the most important, the most crucial part. And that's my sort of philosophy. So it lined straight with Estin, and I think as head teachers that should be the number one focus, is the teaching and learning, because that's, and when you go to about cause and effect, because that's about impact, it's about making the impact. So for me it was, what are we doing that has impact and has value, and Estin would always come back to that. So you're doing that, but so what? What is the impact? And that, I think that's where we're driving in terms of our self-evaluation and quality assurance. We're more looking at impact now as well, rather than putting, this is what we do. Yes. It's the impact of what we do is the most important part. And I think for my professional journey of being a head teacher and leadership, I've really start to get my head around that more. As a process, it's the impact, and stop doing stuff that's not having impact. Right,
I'm going to ask you in about 2 minutes 2 or 3 words that you captured your inspection. So have a think about that in the background.
Okay.
But in the meantime, being a head, I've the privilege of meeting lots of heads. It's an incredibly rewarding job, but it's not without its challenges. So as an inspectorate, if we're out there every week. If there was something you were to tell us to be aware of when we're coming in to see you, what would it be?
It's a big list.
So where'd you start?
Yeah. In terms of me at the moment, I say it's retention, recruitment of staff. I think it's difficult. I think schools it's not easy at the moment in terms of finance as well, which I think is really affecting the recruitment and retention. I think the new qualifications, the ALN reform, I think the workload on staff is significant. There's been a lot of change. And I think that change is, I met with Ian Morgan not so long ago from WJEC about that process of the qualifications, the assessments around the GCSE is absolutely huge. We talk about technology, the uploading and downloading of files and all that is putting a lot of pressure on staff. And there is a knock-on effect there that I think teachers are thinking, do I need to stay in this profession?
Yeah.
And that is, and trying to recruit staff in, there can be very small fields in certain subject areas and specialist areas, particularly your languages, your Welsh, particularly, in an English-speaking school, your sciences, that causes pressure because you just want good people to be, the best to be in front of students all the time. And I think that's a problem. And the finances around, budget cuts. We've got probably, since I started 4 years ago, we're probably down 8 to 9 teaching staff and about 12 to 15 support staff.
It's a lot, isn't it?
It's a lot. And we haven't replaced 3 teachers have moved on to new schools, promotion. We haven't replaced them this year because we can't afford to replace them. And then you get non-specialists.
Teaching specialist subjects,
because you're filling the gaps. Bigger classes. And then you get that cycle then of retention recruitment. So
I would say it's similar for us, but our biggest challenge really is the number of pupils who need to access our provision, who maybe can't at the moment because capacity.
And having to be dealt then in mainstream.
Yes, so it has that knock-on effect on mainstreams. We have pupils then who may be not accessing education, and we need to look to see what creative ways we can put education in place. But I think when we have all of the Welsh Government developments on different policies, sometimes they don't all align. And so as an alternative provider, as an UNOTUS provider, you're looking through various documentation thinking, well, can I do this? Is it okay if I do that? But then because of ALN reform, they need to be in our building on our site. I can't look for an alternative provider. So there's different challenges, I would say, that we face.
There is. And I think one of the things we have to do as an inspectorate is we always have to report. But we have to be cognizant of, the pressures you're under because of things in the system. And it probably won't surprise you that virtually everything you mentioned there, we've raised with government as being issues. The finance, the recruitment in particular, the fact that the increase in, demand for PRUs is really rising quite significantly. Most of them are full at the moment. So, and that there are then knock-ons into the mainstream. Right. Last question. If you were to capture your inspection in 2 or 3 words, what would they be? Who wants to go first?
You can go on.
I was going to say, I'll go second on this one.
Even a sentence is fine.
I would say challenging.
Good.
Actually quite exciting though. That when it comes to a challenge, meeting it head on. So quite exciting. And for us as a school, it was rewarding in the end. It felt like it reinforced that we're doing a good job. And to get that from outside an organisation of the school, I think it was rewarding. So challenging, exciting, rewarding.
I was going to say, you've stolen one of my words. I was going to use rewarding. But I think it's also humbling to have your professional judgments acknowledged and validated. I think because you always want to do the best for your staff and pupils. And sometimes when you're living in it day in, day out, and you have things thrown at you from various angles, sometimes it is nice to step back and think, do you know what? We really do a good job. And these professionals who've come into my school, have validated that.
There's not a lot of thanks in it sometimes, is there?
No.
Validated is a good word.
Yeah. Well, on that positive note, can I just say a huge thanks from us, Diolch o galon. I think it's been a really interesting session. And hopefully it will get across. Don't be scared.
No, definitely don't be scared.
It will be rigorous. It will be pressurised. but it's manageable. You know, we spend a lot of time looking at people's well-being now, but it is for a purpose. And you know, I've always said I'm not really particularly precious about what we do, but it's got to add value to you, and it's got to lead to impact.
Yeah.
So thank you ever so much. Thank you for coming down.
Thank you.
And we look forward to the IV whenever it comes along.
Yes, next.
Diolch yn fawr i chi. Thank you all. I hope you find it interesting. I hope you find it useful. Hopefully it's demystified a little bit about what to expect once you've received the magic phone call. I think the worst I heard was recently I was at an inspection where the headmistress had started the job on Monday and got the call on Friday.
Oh.
She did very well. So I hope it was useful. This is part of a series, really. We're looking at about how to make the whole system more approachable, and so you understand what to expect, and hopefully it'll reduce some of the anxiety, which will never go away, but sometimes, you know, can be quite overwhelming. So diolch i chi. I hope you enjoyed it. Goodbye from us.
Thank you.
Diolch.